What's the real difference between the Mongols and Turkic people? It's a question that goes back thousands of years. At first glance, they might seem quite similar. They share a common landscape, physical features, and aspects of culture. But over time, their journeys diverged. Today, we'll explore the rich history, connections, and unique paths of these two powerful groups. To understand these groups, we need to start with their roots. Both Mongolic and Turkic people trace their origins back to the harsh, expansive steppes of Central and East Asia. This environment shaped their early societies. They were nomadic, relying on horses, herding, and an intimate knowledge of the land. Living in close proximity, Mongolic and Turkic tribes shared many of the same survival strategies, which is partly why their early cultures appear so similar. From their way of life to their clothing and even some of their beliefs, the Mongols and early Turkic people were almost inseparable. Both groups followed a nomadic lifestyle, which meant they lived in portable homes like yurts, valued horses, and developed a deep connection to the land they roamed. But what did they look like? Both Mongolic and early Turkic people had features we often associate with East Asian ancestry: darker hair, eye folds, and straight, coarse hair. These features come from a shared genetic heritage, which combines East and West Eurasian influences. But historically, both groups leaned more toward East Asian characteristics. What's interesting is that Turkic and Mongolic people didn't just look similar because of shared ancestry. They were genetically quite close as well. Their shared history and centuries of living side by side meant that genetic exchange was common, making them even more alike. One area where the differences between the two groups become clearer is language. Mongolic languages belong to their own language family, separate from Turkic languages. But both languages share similarities, like agglutination, adding bits to the ends of words to change their meaning. This shared linguistic structure is partly why people once thought they were from the same language family. Even though they share some linguistic traits, most linguists today don't believe Turkic and Mongolic languages are directly related. Instead, these similarities likely came from long-term interaction and influence, rather than a common origin. Religion also reveals some similarities and differences. Both Mongolic and Turkic peoples traditionally followed Tengriism, a spiritual belief system centered around the sky god, Tengri. Tengriism was more than a religion. It was a way of life that connected them to nature, their ancestors, and their nomadic lifestyle. In Tengriism, both groups had shamans who served as spiritual leaders, guiding their communities through rituals and ceremonies that honored nature and the spirit world. Over time, as Turkic people migrated westward, they encountered new religions like Islam and Christianity, and many eventually converted. Today, while some Turkic groups still retain shamanistic practices, Islam is predominant among Turkic people in Central Asia and the Middle East. The Mongols, however, have largely preserved their traditional beliefs or adopted Buddhism, which has become significant in Mongolia alongside shamanism. This split in religious evolution reflects how differently the two groups adapted to new cultural influences. Around the 6th century, Turkic tribes began migrating westward in what's known as the Great Turkic Migrations. Leaving their homeland in southeastern Siberia, they spread across Central Asia and eventually into the Middle East and even Europe. During this journey, they encountered and mixed with Indo-European groups who looked quite different from them. Before the Turkic migrations, much of Central Asia was populated by Indo-European speakers like the Scythians and Tocharians, who had lighter skin, lighter hair, and were culturally distinct. As Turkic people settled in Central Asia, they gradually began to mix with these groups, adopting some cultural elements and traits in the process. This blending is why Turkic groups further west, like the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, and modern-day Turks, tend to have a mix of East and West Eurasian features. Essentially, the further they moved from their homeland, the more their appearance and culture evolved to reflect their new environments. Meanwhile, the Mongols also had their own massive expansion in the 13th century under Genghis Khan. But unlike the Turkic people, the Mongols didn't leave behind large Mongolic populations in the areas they conquered. Their rule was often brief, And though they left cultural and political influence, few Mongol settlers stayed behind to change the gene pool. The Hazara people in Afghanistan are a rare exception. They claim descent from the Mongol soldiers and settlers left behind, and genetic studies confirm their Mongolian ancestry. The Hazara have preserved many Mongolic features, although they also mixed with surrounding populations, giving them a unique East-West Eurasian appearance. Today, the Mongols and Turkic people share both a historical connection and distinct identities. In regions like southeastern Siberia, Mongolia, and parts of northeast China, Turkic and Mongolic groups still retain many shared physical and cultural traits. Groups like the Tuvans, Kyrgyz, Kazakhs, and Uyghurs remain close to their original homeland and retain similar traditions. However, Turkic groups in the Middle East and Europe, like the Turks in Turkey and Azeris in Azerbaijan, show the effects of centuries of migration and blending with Indo-European and other populations. These groups look quite different from Mongols today and have unique cultural traditions that reflect their diverse influences. So, while the Turkic and Mongolic people started out with shared roots and close connections, their journeys took them in very different directions. The Turkic people moved westward, adapting and evolving as they encountered new cultures, while the Mongols mostly stayed in their homeland, preserving their traditional way of life. Thanks for joining this deep dive into the history and evolution of the Turkic and Mongolic people. If you found this fascinating, drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical explorations. Until next time.